We have a really great panel here. Welcome, Game Changers. How about that? Did you ever think you'd be considered a game changer? No. So we're going to go into, find out a little bit about each one. Just to start out, though, I'm curious to know when you were first proposed or shown the ideas or the script. What made you want to take on each of these type of films? So we'll start with you, Jackie.
I didn't know it was really a different type of anything. I just thought it's probably one of the first movies that I ever edited, and I thought, I'm lucky. That was basically it. And so Luis Valdez, who was a director, I didn't have a script or anything, he said, Universal is trying to point out who, if Latinos would, if we could make movies for just a certain audience. And it's a true story about the Zoot riots during World War II. And this was a big hit. It was played in out here for about 2 years. It went to New York, and it flopped in New York. So then we made the movie, and that's what happened.
That's what you do.
Yeah, and we had no money for this, really no money.
Oh, great. Again,
Anyway.
we'll take a look at a scene. So, Bob, about the first mockumentary. This is Spinal Tap. So, great work. So, were you given a script, or was it a relationship? Was there a script?
There was no script. Actually, I talked to my friend Karen Murphy, who was the producer, just the other day, because I had to think, was there a script? I couldn't remember. And she told me that there was a script, but it was the guys were forced to make the script by the producing company, who had to have boards that said scene numbers and what would happen. And they would. She told me funny things. She said also they said, how are you going to make this film with this money? How are you going to pay for catering trucks? And they said, look, as long as we have somewhere to eat, we'll bring sandwiches. And how about facilities, bathrooms? Well, everywhere we shoot, there will be bathrooms there, so we'll use those. So the film was really made on a shoestring. And how did I get to do it? Well, I guess we made it in 81, 82. And I'd come to America in 75 from England. And not Australia or South Africa, English accent. And I'd gone to film school in England, and I'd been an assistant there and done a little bit of cutting, but I came here and I said I want to be an editor. So what I'll do is I'll edit. And I didn't do, many people come up in their careers by being assistants to very good editors and eventually getting a chance to do work on very good films. I worked on a lot of crummy films, and I really kind of discovered how to edit by doing that. And one of those films, a few years earlier, was a film called Stunt Rock, which actually was maybe a precursor to Spinal Tap. But that was made by an Australian director who had a friend in Australia who was a stuntman. He shot second unit on lots of Australian films, and this stuntman was his friend. And he wrote a script based around him as being a stuntman who came to America to see his cousin. And his cousin, this producer-director, had also found this rock and roll group called Sorcery, who put magic in their act. So he would come to them, and these two guys were cousins. I think the guy was the drummer, probably the drummer, yes. And it was a crazy film. I mean, there was an excuse to cut to all these stunt things that he had. And but through that, one of my assistants had a friend who would come by the cutting room. Her name was Karen Murphy. And Karen Murphy then later shortly after that, asked me to go to AFI and edit a film there, where at that time they didn't have editing fellows at AFI. So somebody was editing it, but the director wasn't liking it. So I went there and I poured my heart and soul into it. And frankly, from all the films I'd worked on, this was actually this little AFI thing was the one closest to my heart. And then I went off and still did a number of other weird things. But I stayed friends with Karen. And Karen, in the meantime, was friends with Rob Reiner and Christopher Guest. and became the producer of Spinal Tap. And somehow over that period, I had some other connections to them. I knew I made a film with this young man who came out from New York, who'd made industrials and documentaries. I made his first Learning Corporation afternoon TV movie. His name was Stephen Gyllenhaal, who later on went to have 2 children and became film stars.
A little famous there.
And he and his wife, Naomi Foner, who was a screenwriter, they were friends with Chris Guest. Karen was friends with all these people. I knew them a little bit. I wasn't like going in that field of people, but I knew them. And I was there at times when they talked about the film, and they were having a lot of trouble putting this film together because nobody got the idea of a fake documentary, and it would be shot in 16 millimeter, and these people would be doing what? And it's like, it just didn't make any sense at all. But somehow it meshed with a type of comedy that I knew from England. And so I was there when they were talking about it, and it got to be and also I was working on various films, and every now and again they needed something pulled on film, and I would pull that thing for them. And it just got to be intuitively understood that if they ever got to make this film, that I would cut it.
Fantastic.
So that's basically the short story of what happened, and then I cut it.
Thank you for what you've cut.
Okay.
That's awesome. So Steve Rivkin, Avatar, small film.
Micro budget.
Exactly. But yeah, game changer, most financially successful CGI 3D film. How'd you come about cutting Avatar?
Well, I'd just come off the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, and Jim was looking for someone to come in and help him cut the movie. He realized that it was not something he was going to be able to do all by himself. The process proved to be considerably more complicated, especially in the way he chose to approach it. Basically cutting the film 2 times, once in capture form and once for virtual cameras. So it was quite an ordeal, and I got a very strange call to come down to meet with the producer. I thought Jim was actually in New Zealand or out of the country. So John Lando, the producer, showed me an art reel that just basically boggled the mind. The design of, and he'd been working with production designers for probably 3-4 years before that. So they had accumulated thousands of images that he put into a reel to show the studio to try and get the film greenlit. And I saw this reel, and it was like a world I had never seen. And I wasn't allowed to read the script at that point. I was just told the story. And John said, well, why don't we go meet Jim? He's doing a scout right now. I said, a scout? Well, but here? What do you mean? He says, yeah. So we go out onto the stage, and Jim is holding this little virtual camera that looks like a small laptop, small like iPad or something with handles. And he was looking inside of the virtual world, scouting a set in an empty room. So, here's Jim with a big cable and people following him around holding this thing, scouting environments and sets. And I said, this is crazy, So he said, here, let me show you what we're doing here. And he took me into his cutting room, and he showed me a scene that had been captured, and he shot virtual cameras on, and he put together. And I saw the capture with the actors in these crazy suits with dots all over it and funny, stringy things that represented hair. And I thought, this is the wildest thing I have ever seen.
Sign me up.
Yeah, right. I said, I'm there. If he wants me, I'm there. Whatever it takes. And that was how I got sucked in.
Wow, that's awesome. Basically a whole new world, All right, so Paul Rubell, the first Marvel superhero with Blade.
I actually didn't know that Blade was the first Marvel movie until I was selected to be on this panel.
Surprise!
And in fact, I'm not sure it was. Wasn't Howard the Duck a Marvel movie.
Maybe. Who edited
So,
that?
so that was Sidney Walensky. So I really shouldn't be here. So
Oh, please sit. Sit down. We have a scene you have to stay for.
okay, but since I have to stay, how did I get involved in Blade? Well, backstory, brief backstory. I was an assistant editor on several features, and then I transitioned to editing on some really low-budget indie features, which went nowhere. And so I went to work in TV, and I was able to edit in TV, thinking, okay, I'll just do this for a while, get my chops together, and then I'll go back to features. I ended up cutting TV, movies, and miniseries. I did 17 in 10 years.
Wow.
And every time I wanted to, I heard about a feature and sort of promoted myself, it was, well, you can't do a feature, you're a TV editor. Because that's kind of the mindset. And I think it's better now, but maybe still a little bit. So I eventually did a couple of TV movies with John Frankenheimer, and then he was hired to replace a director on a feature, and told the studio that he wanted me to do it. And the studio said, no, you can't hire him, he's a TV editor. And John, bless his heart, said, you don't take him, you don't get me.
Wow.
So they had to take me. They didn't want to, they had to. And the picture was the famously disastrous island of Dr. Moreau. And our first preview was a disaster. And I was working in my editing room one day, and my fax machine came to life, and a resume spit out, and it was like a famous Hollywood editor. And I called up the head of post-production at New Line, and I said, I think I was just sent this by mistake. He said, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I was going to call you, but we think someone needs to come in, someone with more experience, and take a look. So I worked with this guy, and we got along great, and we did his notes, and we previewed it again, and it did worse. And so he said, okay, goodbye, thanks. And we just finished the movie as best we could. And then my feature editing career was over, and I went back to and edited a TV movie. And then I got a call one day from the head of post-production at New Line, same guy who had sent the resume to the wrong fax address. And he said, we have a movie coming up, and I want to put you up for editing. And I said, that's really nice of you, but I'm shocked. I don't understand. You didn't want to hire me in the first place because I was a TV editor, and the movie was a critical and commercial disaster. Why would you? And he reminded me what I'd said to him on that phone call when I got the fax. When he was apologizing, I said, it's all right, it's a win-win for me. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, either he's going to come on and he's going to make the movie better, and my name's going to be on it, and so it'll be better, or he won't be able to think of any way to make it better, and I'll know that I did the best I could with the material that I had. But either way, it's a win. And he was like, okay. But he told me that he had been so impressed by that he wanted to put me up for this next movie. So I went and met with the director who I think was only the second movie he'd ever directed, Steve Norrington. Unbelievably talented guy. And I was the first editor that he had met with, and he said basically, you can have the movie if you want to, but I don't know why you'd want to work with me. He said, I'm a total asshole. He said, in fact, he said, and I quote, he said, I'm as mean as James Cameron. I'm just not as talented. So for me, I didn't care what it was. It was a feature, and so I'm in. So that's why I took the movie.
That's awesome. So take a chance, be up to the challenge, work for an asshole. It's all right. So that's
We're now good friends, so
Okay.
I can tell that story.
so great. So why don't we go ahead and start looking at some scenes? I think we're going to start off with Jackie with Zoot Suit. I think there's a musical number if we have that queued up.
Put on a Zoot suit, makes you feel real rude. Look like a diamond, sparkling, shining. Ready for dancing, ready for the boogie tonight. All the heck gets up in Harlem where that rave shake. Come on, los machucones down in Harley. With Weezus and the Pompadours was real keen on the dance floors or the ballrooms donde bailan swing. You better get hip tonight and put on a Zoot suit.
Hey man, you call that dancing?
Toma!
It's not your night.
El loco, vamos al borlo, where the carlango, ramositando, dance with your wheeze and dance your boogie tonight. Cause Zoot is crazy in California, también en Colorado y Arizona. They're wearing that Gucci en El Paso, y todos los salones en Chicago. You better get your hip tonight and put on a
Makes you want to get up and dance. Anyway, that's fantastic. That was a really wild scene. He's pretty suave. Were you on set watching dailies when?
No, I was doing the Foley for all the footprints, and there's like 40, 50 of them in there.
Were you dancing the whole time? Were you?
I was crying by the time 3 o'clock in the morning came. That was it, yeah.
So you chose that scene for
Just to sort of see how this was. What we use the audience. Sometimes we use the audience. Sometimes the seats were empty. Sometimes they were there. So with this rotating set, you would see at the end of that things would be moving and changing. So it's sort of like a play, but it was more interesting.
And had you had any experience doing anything in musicals before, or was this your first?
This is the first one. I liked it, though.
So after looking at that and looking at the film again, has it been, how many years since the last time you saw it?
Oh, probably 20.
Do you watch it and go, wow, I wish I could have changed this?
Yes,
Or?
I do. Well, I liked it. I still liked it. But yes, I should have tightened that. I should have.
Oh, great. No, fantastic scene. So thank you for your work. So we'll go ahead to, this is Spinal Tap. Do you want to set the scene up, or do you want to just play it?
I can set up a little bit,
Okay.
if you'd like. It's in the middle of the film. I don't know how many people are familiar with the story of the film, but it's a rock. Well, I guess they are. Okay. The tour is obviously not really working out properly for them. We've already had the scene where they find out that their album, Smell the Glove, is not going to be released with the cover that it has, and that's a shadow hanging over the group, and they're very upset about that. There's a little bit of testiness going on between the guys. The scene that we're going to see has them starting to rehearse for the next gig. And during that scene, Michael McKean's girlfriend, Janine, arrives from England. And one of the things that's interesting about this film, I think, is that it wasn't just a series of jokes about a spoof of heavy metal. It actually had an underlying dramatic arc to it. And the main part of that was the relationship between Michael McKean and Christopher Guest. And that they were best of friends from childhood. And in the background, there was this woman who was part of the group, part of the situation, who was kind of did Yoko Ono getting between them a little bit. And so during this rehearsal, she arrives, and you see the drama on Chris's face as he sees Janine coming there and breaking up the rehearsal already. At the same time, the manager, Ian, comes out on the stage with the new pressing of the album. But the album now has a totally black cover. There's no picture on it at all. And it's the shambles of this group trying to pretend that this is a good thing and that it makes sense. And then it goes to another little bit of a concert scene, just so you can see, for those people who haven't seen it, which is maybe somewhere there, that there was concerts in there and they were funny in the concerts as well. The other thing I was going to say about it, which is talking about what was difficult about editing it. They would shoot these scenes. You asked about the script. There was no script. The guys knew this stuff very well. They knew these characters tremendously. They improvised it totally. And they would shoot a scene, and there'd be one camera, and it would be swimming around. Rob would sometimes actually stand with the cameraman and put his arm around his shoulder and move him over to face somewhere else, using him as a human tripod. And then they shoot it again. But the guys were standing in different places, and then they shoot it another time. So you had all this footage, and they were cracking up new jokes each time. It wasn't the same script. They were just ad-libbing, totally ad-libbing. So you're always trying to get in, trying to make the sound cut was the hardest thing. Because every time somebody finished, if you committed to one joke, there was someone else who was overlapping with another joke coming into it. And then you came to a shot, and people were on the other side, and everything was confused. In the end, what we used was the power of the narrative. We just determinedly stayed with telling you a story. And your focus wasn't on where everybody was or what they were doing or if they had to drink up or down. I mean, that's so even in dramas, but to hear it, so it's tremendous. So on this, if you notice, you'll see people pop around all over the place. You can even hear little bits of other jokes, and then but that's cut off. And, but you try to fade in over someone else interrupting and leading off. So that's basically it.
Great, so we'll go ahead and roll. This is Spinal Tap.
Testing. Test. This is mic number one. Isn't this a lot of fun? Okay, got the mics.
Let's do GSM, all right? GSM.
I'm wasting my time. You know what I want. Heavy up. You know what I need. Oh, maybe you don't. Do I have to come right smack dab out and tell you everything? Give me some money. Give me some money. Oh, yeah.
Hello, darling. Hello, I've got a surprise for you.
Where'd you come from?
Where do you think I came from? Bloody airplane, anytime, right?
God, it feels good. Oh, I've been wanting to do that for a long time.
Mum and carrying about with me. Right?
What? They're filming.
That's the film crew.
Oh.
I told you about this, the film crew. Martin,
Hi, Mark.
this is Janine.
Hello.
Here it is!
Visitor's Day, isn't it?
Here it is, lads!
You better turn.
Smell the gloves, me old booties. Oh, really? Gather round. Where's David?
You're kidding.
David! David, get up here.
David, smell the glove is here. Hello, Janine.
A moment, we've all been waiting for. Here we go.
I live to see the day.
Plenty for everybody.
Wait a minute, a little fan.
What do you think?
Is this the test pressing?
No, this is it. Yes,
This
that's
is
right.
Smell the Glove by
That's-
Spinal Tap. When you go
That's
to the
Smell
store,
the Glove. That's the jacket cover that's going out across the country
It's the
in every
compromise
store.
way.
Yes.
Is it going to say anything here?
It doesn't even say
No,
anything.
it's not going to say
Nothing
anything.
on the
So it's
side.
just going to be like this, all
It's going to be
black.
that simple, beautiful, classic.
It does look like, black leather. You can see
As
yourself
artists.
in both sides.
I wouldn't feel so bad.
It's like a black
Feel
mirror.
So bad.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
like- well, I think it looks like death.
David,
it looks
death-
like mourning. I mean, it looks.
Every movie in every cinema is about death. Death sells.
I think he's right. There's something about this that's so black. It's like, how much more black could this be? And the answer is none. None
Is that good?
more black.
I think you're like rationalising this whole thing like into something that you did on purpose. You know, I think we're stuck with a very stupid and a very dismal looking album. This is depressing. This is something you wear around your arm. You don't put this on your fucking turntable.
David, it's a choice.
I frankly think that this is the turning point. Okay. I think this is. We're on our way now. You know, it's time to.
I agree.
It's time to kick ass.
That was just amazing. People still laughing hysterically.
It's good to hear.
So you chose that scene because of the music or the...
Because it shows the comedy and the music, and so I was so impressed. I saw this film about 5 years ago, and then I watched it again just a few days ago, and I was not a heavy metal fan, but it was I love the music, and they're good songs they wrote, and they're really funny. And the guys are really funny. So I chose it for that. I chose it for that element of showing what the structural difficulties of editing it were. And also because it highlighted the fact that there was an underlying emotional arc to what happened. In the end, the boys get separated. And at the end, they come together and they reunite on stage. And it's a very uplifting end. And it has, they have a happy concert in Japan. So.
It's a story that, does come together, and I mean, I can't imagine how much footage you had to go through.
Yeah, so, well, it was a lot of footage. We watched in, like the old days, they shot and we watched dailies every night. And we would watch about 3 to 5 hours of dailies, and then at the weekend as well, every night. There was a 5-6 week shoot, and there was such a lot of footage. And because it was improvised, there was so many good, there was a lot, it was a bounty of good material. And the hard part was what to take away. The same with the films I did with Christopher Guest as well. It was also always fabulous stuff. It's just like paring away. And this one had a very strong story, so you got that as well. But that was the fun part of it. We got a 5-hour first cut. We watched. And by the way, when we watched dailies, it was always fun watching it. I mean, even though everybody was exhausted and some people just slumping in the chair, and there was pizza brought in, endless pizza and Chinese food. But we made a copy of the 5-hour cut, and at that time, I really don't know what format it was on. Whether we were cutting on 16, and which was a trial in itself, and I don't know if we duped the 16 or if we put it onto 3/4-inch video cassette, probably was what it would have been. But the reason I don't know is that that's mysteriously disappeared. It's not in the vaults, it's not anywhere, it seems to have just vanished off the face. Maybe some guy at home is sitting and watching that 5-hour cut endlessly on cycle, I don't know. But I'd love to see it. There's some things in it that there was a joke that is kind of in the film, but was planned. It is typical of the things we took out. That used to be, they had a supporting band on tour, which you don't see, which is headlined by Sherry Curry, who was the singer from the Runaways. And she obviously at one point teams up with one of the band members, and then the next scene he has a herpes sore. And then he's not with her, and then later on she's with another one. And each time, each person gets a sore until they have a band meeting where they all come together and decide to vote it out, except for the drummer, who doesn't have a sore, who's waiting. But we thought, well, this is going to be really strange having that in there. But it's so generic to the period and the time that just these little bits of herpes sores, we talked about, getting rid of them, but they caused a laugh whenever they came on screen, just by themselves. And everybody got that. It kept on going from one guy to another guy.
Well, and nowadays you could just take it out digitally and just
Totally,
track it
totally.
right out.
Nowadays, yeah, yeah.
So, no, great work.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Would you change anything after
No.
seeing the film, or?
No, I thought it played great. No, my only love would be to see more of it, but it was really, these guys are really smart. There's things, and it's the same with the films and Chris. I wish I'd kept all the outtakes, because I'd just sit at home and watch them the rest of my life, and that would be enough fun.
That must be priceless.
Yes.
Great.
Think of the money. Yeah. No.
Thank you. So, Avatar and Steve Rivkin. So, what do you want to set up your scene?
Well,
Actually,
I actually brought something a little different. It's a little bit of a glimpse into the process as opposed to just showing a scene. So I have a scene that, a portion of a scene actually, so that I could fit in the time frame, where you see what dailies look like of performance capture and what we do with that to pre-edit the performances. And so we create a performance edit or a pre-cut, however you choose to say it, but we basically take the best takes from everybody. And this is a very simple scene that I use just to demonstrate the process, but ultimately we do have the capability of combining takes from different actors into one master. So if you had one actor that peaked in take 3 and one that peaked in take 6, you had the capability of putting them together in one take, adjusting sync so that they could actually the timing was right. And of course, as you know, if you're just doing sections of cuts, you can adjust the time between them to make up for whatever difference, or we have the ability to stitch out pauses and line it up to the original performance. But so we do a capture and then a performance edit, which is when the director says, I know I had a better take here. All that stuff that happens much later, we do in this pre-cut process where the director works with the actors and concentrates solely on that and does not concern himself with shots, camera angles, dollies, sound, anything, lighting that would normally take up a lot of time while actors are on the set. And it's just concentrating on pure performance. After that very careful selection process is made, then those shots are prepared for virtual photography. And this is a process where we have a virtual lab where a lot of people sit on boxes and merge these performances into the environments they belong to. Wardrobe, virtual props, all this stuff goes into these, what we call loads that are used to play back on a stage long after the actors are gone. So at this stage, it's just Jim again, alone in a room with his little viewfinder, shooting the scene. And imagine the freedom that that can give a director to concentrate solely on shot creation. The actors are always going to give their best performance. They're always going to hit their marks. They'll never forget their lines. And you can shoot to your heart's content. You can shoot close-ups, mediums, wides, cranes, dollies, Steadicams, whatever it is all derived from whatever the specific performance has been selected, or a combination of performances. So, opposite to focusing on performance from the actors, when they're gone, he doesn't have to worry about that anymore. And he's in the hands of an insecure director. The infinite possibilities might drive one mad. But for someone who really knows what they want and wants to explore different options, this is invaluable. So the first two clips are dailies and then a performance edit. And the second two, one would be what we create on the stage, shooting virtual photography to create the camera angles that are derived from these performances. And then the last clip shows the final render with a window where you can see some of the original performance lined up against the final render. Now, if you could leave my mic open, I might say a few words during the clip, if you don't mind. So we can go ahead and run that. So this is going to be how dailies come in. These are 4 reference cameras.
And sometimes answered.
Jim likes to get close-ups on every actor and then some kind of 2-shot. Now, this is a simple 2-character scene, so you can imagine when you have 6 characters and 400 crowd extras.
The voices of our ancestors.
I can hear them.
So now the challenge is make a pre-edit or a performance cut from the dailies.
This is a place for prayers to be heard.
So I'm just taking like a 2-shot and cutting where I think we might want to go to a close-up, but it's not necessarily where there's going to be a close-up. And it's not necessarily the angle it will be either. This is just a record of the performance that is captured. It's a visual reference of what's being captured by the overhead infrared cameras that record all the motion and the face cameras that record the performance.
I can hear them.
So now here's a virtual camera cut. Now this was shot months after the
This is a
actors
place for prayers to be heard.
performed using the
Sometimes
takes.
answered. We call these trees Sutraya Mokri, the tree of voices. The voices of our ancestors.
So the sound is all screwed up left and right, but so you can see they're not stationary cameras. They don't represent.
I can hear them.
They don't represent the reference cameras at all. This is what the final render looks like.
This is a place for prayers to be heard. And sometimes answered. We call these trees Sutraya Mokri, the tree of voices. The voices of our ancestors.
I can hear them.
It's just fascinating. Did you realize that you were going to be cutting a completely different way? I mean, you are still cutting. You're still cutting a story. You're cutting dialogue, but with all the VFX, all the different angles, not knowing what you may actually end up with.
Well, it maybe seems a little more complicated than it is, because in reality, you're starting with performance, and as an editor, you always start with that. The difference is that how often do we find ourselves with the dilemma? The best performance is not in the angle or the size that we really want it. Okay, those problems go away. So the first phase, you're concentrating purely on performance, regardless of what angle you're seeing. And as long as we have clean reference, because one of the things that you notice is that there's always a close-up that we can refer to when we're finishing to make sure that the actors, every move, every twitch, every smile is delivered in the virtual digital character. And those digital characters are driven by every facial movement, every motion. So that process is completely performance driven. And the second editing process, it's not we're working with the template image that you saw that's kind of a crude like a video game image, which in our pipeline now has vastly improved, so it's much more detailed. But the virtual cameras, you're cutting as you go, and you're cutting, there's less left to the imagination than, say, if you're working on a green screen film where you don't see what's in the background. You see the entire environment, the entire action, everything that's in the shot you see. So you're cutting more or less conventional film images, even though they were derived from performances that were edited previously. So as Jim is creating these cameras, we were actually cutting on the stage where there was this wonderful interaction between the director and the editor, where you could contribute to the creative process. You know, it's like, how many times as an editor you sit there and go, God, if we only had a medium shot here where we really need it. And, you know, I started assembling the scenes as he was shooting with these cameras streamed into the Avid, and I started putting the scenes together, and Jim would come over and say, what if I got a medium shot there? And I'd say, that's a great idea, you know. And he'd just go shoot it. Now, we don't have to worry about the actors. Even if you thought of that 2 weeks afterwards when you're looking at the scene, you could go play back that performance and shoot whatever you needed to pick up. And that's pretty amazing.
That's pretty game-changing there. And so after looking at the film again, or do you have any changes you think you would make, or would you keep everything the same? Or?
You know, it's like there was an old-time editor many, many years ago who told me a little saying that I've never forgotten. It only takes 2 people to edit a film, one to do it and one to say stop.
That's perfect, yeah.
So I think for the most part, you know, many of the films I've worked on, if I see a little scene showing up on cable or something, and if I find myself saying, no, maybe I should have done that differently, I think of that saying. Because it doesn't matter whether you're, you know, making a painting or writing a book or a script or making a movie or a television show. It always takes someone to just say, okay, that's it. It's done, you know.
Step away. Very good. All right, Paul, taking a look at, do you want to set up your scene for Blade?
Yeah, I think if I tried to set it up, it would be just as confusing as just watching it. So,
you want to just roll it? Okay.
Frosty was a good party.
Yeah, but where is he?
Come on, baby. Don't keep everyone waiting.
Deacon, someone here to see you.
I gotta talk to you, Frost. I'm sorry, I had to come here. It's a mistake going to Pearls. I know that. Dumb fucking me. I know you're disappointed.
Am I that transparent?
You want to meet him?
Yeah.
I can get you guys anything. Because we're tight, we're like brothers.
Bro.
Hey.
Yeah.
Deke, I've been telling these bitches all about you, man. They've been dying to meet you. They're so psyched. Badass bitches. They were, I met them. Deke?
Frost, it's about Blade.
He's busy, you know, because when he's focused all the time, he doesn't have time to fuck around.
Look, Frost, this is important. Blade was waiting for me. Look, they're using the girl as bait.
And you're stupid enough to think.
Shut up, bitch. I didn't know he was gonna be there. It's a trap, see? And don't worry about it, though. It's no problem. We can still get the girl.
Forget the girl. I want Blade. You hear me, Quinn? I want him alive.
What? Wait a minute, man. When I'm alive?
What's that smell?
You will need 12 pure bloods to make the ritual work. Krieger, is that you? He's here! He's here!
This must be Pearl, the record keeper.
He's going to kill me! You need me, Frost! You need me!
Pearl, your history. Have the good grace to die with some fucking dignity.
Frost! This bloodsucker.
Congratulations, Blade.
Frost.
I hear you've been looking for me. I'm flattered.
It'll pass.
What is that?
That biscuit boy is a UV lamp. We're gonna play a little game of 20 questions. Depending on how you answer, you may walk out of here with a tan. What's that?
Oh, it's nothing. It's routine research. Actually, it's a video game.
That must have hurt.
It's a fragment, a piece of the prophecy.
What prophecy?
Oh, I'm not really sure. There's so many outside. And there's nothing you can do about it, Daywalker!
Is that so?
Well, that's what Frost says.
Well, then you won't mind me borrowing this for a while, will you? If he moves, fry him. What's in here?
Nothing. It's just a storeroom, but you're wasting your time. There's nothing of importance to anyone.
Then you won't mind if I take a peek.
He moved.
That was pretty wild. So why'd you choose that scene?
Because it had Stephen Dorff in it, for one thing, and most of the big action scenes, all the big action scenes didn't really. And I loved Dorff. I loved his character, and it had some humor and some good visuals. You know.
Some blood.
And blood. I'm not sure, but I think maybe it was rated R. Now that would be a game changer. That would be like the first and only R-rated Marvel movie.
Now, I think also you mentioned when we talked that it was the first incorporation of electronic music as well.
Well, I don't know if it was the first, but I know that Stephen, the director, introduced me to electronic music because I didn't really listen much. And so, yeah, he I started listening to Chemical Brothers and Aphex Twin and Junkie XL, who's actually in the movie. And and so I'm not aware of really that kind of music being used like this. I mean, as far as being a game changer, I never thought about it, but about a couple of years later, I was having lunch with Norrington, the director, and he said, Blade really set the style for that kind of movie. We were the shit for about a year. And then The Matrix came out, and it was all over.
Another game changer, right?
Yeah.
So, and just out of curiosity, after watching the movie again, would you change anything?
Some of the action that I hadn't seen the movie in 20 years, and it actually, I was like, I'm always scared to look at old stuff that I've worked on because, I'll be enjoying it, and then one thing will come up, and I have to turn it off. And but there wasn't really anything like that. Some of the action seemed a little strained, but I'm not sure that we could have done anything about it editorially. I think maybe it was just shot that way. So, no.
So, well, thank you for that scene. So, one question before we get to some Q&A. I think we have some time for that. Since these are considered game changers and groundbreakers, previews, I'm sure, may have played into how the films were received. So why don't we just go down the line and tell me what the experience was with your first previews, or if you had previews. So Jackie with the Zoot Suit?
We did a couple in, I guess in the Dome, but we did a few smaller ones, but people were dancing in the aisles. I mean, I never saw it. I don't even know how half the people were watching this screen as much, but they were dancing, and it was like a party. And this happened about 3 or 4 times.
That's a good preview.
Yeah.
And now with cell phones and stuff, and to distract people, I guess it's a good thing. So
yeah.
That's awesome. So how was previews for This Is Spinal Tap?
We did friends and family screenings up at AFI because they had 16mm 2 double system 2 projectors. But those, with Rob and Chris and Harry and Michael, friends and family, were all these celebrities. So they were kind of strange screenings. And also, we were cutting the 16mm on a flatbed, and it tended to pull the perforations. So every time it screened, we would see the frame line start creeping down into the frame as new perforations being punched out, and then rolling back up and lock in and be okay. But every time, 3 or 4 times during the screening, they would break. And then I would be up in the back, Rob would be in the front telling jokes. I'd be in the back trying to find code numbers and sync it together. Then he'd come into the room and his face is red. What's happening? What's happening? It's like, so those were terrifying. But everybody loved it there. Those are very useful because they were a smart crowd of filmmakers, and they told us, what was funny, what wasn't, what worked for them. When we kind of finished the film, it was shot on Super 16. We blew it up to 35. And we took it to Dallas and Seattle. And I remember the Dallas screening very clearly. We were in quite a big theater. It was like Times Square. There were people walking around the whole time like they were at a rock concert. There were heads going underneath the screen like this, people with popcorn. Everybody was just having a party time, calling out to each other. And it was a disaster. And no, they didn't like it. I remember the cards, the epitome of the cards was somebody wrote, would have been better with a better group. That was basically how much they got it. It just didn't make any sense. And that's given the fact that Rob Reiner, who's a big TV personality, comes out and says, hi, I'm Marty DeBerge at the beginning, but they forget about it, and they're just watching a stupid group, and that's all they saw. Seattle was basically the same, but a little bit more polite. And then, quite honestly, when it went out, it was very confused release, and halfway through, Rex Reed, I think, compared it to Airplane, and they made a new one-sheet with a guitar neck in a knot, like the Airplane. And then people started going, but it wasn't a big hit. This film became a hit over the years in dorm rooms, on tour buses, at late-night screenings. That's where it got its real fame. So.
That's awesome. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
So did Avatar preview well?
Well, as you saw in Performance Edit, it took probably close to a year for Weta to produce the first shots that came back. So as a result, anytime we looked at the film, it was a mosaic of performance edits, and we'd score it with music and sound effects, but it was performance edits and templates and still frames and some, very few finished shots for a very, very long time. And as it progressed to a point where we could possibly put it in front of a very select group of friends and family, we did that. What was really interesting, again, getting back to performance, is that people, after they saw what the characters would look like, were able to see through that and actually look at the raw capture and still be completely engaged in the story. And we thought if it worked at that level, that it would probably be okay. So later on, much later on, you know, when we were getting much closer to release, maybe, you know, 4 or 5 months before release, we had a little larger friends and family screening where people wrote cards. They didn't rate the film, but we were, you know, Jim was interested in what people had to say about the story, about length, about those kind of things, and we did make some trims after that. But it was a difficult film to preview because, as you can tell, with any visual effects film, and I've previewed quite a few, as soon as you cut to something that is obviously not finished, people are taken out, and so it just depends on what level it's finished. A lot of visual effects films have to wait a very long time before previewing, and the unfortunate result of that is that big money is spent to get films to a certain place, and then, you know, when cuts are made, I mean, it's usually valuable for the, you know, special DVD extras and things like that, so the home video departments generally like that.
And did you see anything in editorial in 3D? Did you do any cutting in 3D, or was it strictly 2D?
Well, we didn't have the capability of editing in 3D, but what we did was and the live action film was shot native 3D, so we did screen dailies in 3D, and then we cut in 2D, and then we had a process where we encoded each eye back into a device that projected it on the screen. So we were able to see our work after we cut it in 3D, but not like today where Avid actually has the capability of viewing 3D. And not advisable to do all day long, but it's nice to check your work.
He definitely apparently changed the industry with, I think the note was saying, forcing or influencing more people to do 3D post with a lot of Marvel films, a lot of features now. So again, great new technology.
And conversions have gotten better. I think after Avatar, there was a rush in Hollywood to convert everything, and I kind of equate it to when sound came in and every movie went, you know, every silent movie being shot, they turned into a soundy, and a lot of them were horrible, you know. And so in the same respect, there were a lot of films that were converted that were poorly done, and audiences started to feel the burn, so to speak, because they'd pay this big money to go see a 3D film, and it's horribly done, and it hurts your eyes, and it is, you know, I mean, Jim always believed that 3D should be an element of the story and not the star. It really plays an important part in helping the audience to be immersed in the characters and the story, and it never takes center stage. So I think, and I've worked on films where the studio heads have said, we're paying for 3D, we really want that stuff to, you know, come out of the screen, and it's not really, it's like Jim would say, they're killing the goose that laid the golden egg. Right. And I think that it's evolved now to a point where conversions are much better. They're easier on the eyes. They've developed the technique, but I'm hoping that in the next wave of 3D evolution that it becomes even more refined, and obviously the ultimate goal is to be able to see it without glasses.
Well, soon, right? Maybe.
Never know.
Right. Okay, so Paul, how was Blade in previews?
Well, I only remember previewing it once. We may have previewed it again, but I don't have any memory of that. But I do remember the director and I going to the run-through in the afternoon just to make sure everything was technically okay, and we sat through the movie on this huge screen. When the lights came up at the end and we looked at each other and we said, "It sucks." And we're like, "Oh, well, we gave it our best shot." And Norrington said, "Well, I don't think I'm going to come tonight because what's the point?" And I said, "Well, I think I have to go." And Norrington said, "Well, maybe I'll show up. I don't know. I'll see you later." And so he did show up, and we kind of slunk into the theater and sat in the back, and the movie played, and then, people filled out their cards, and then the focus group got into the first 2 rows, and the leader said, "How many thought it was excellent?" Everybody raised their hands. "And what did you like about it?" And people were just like going on and on about what they liked about it. I said, "Well, now, so tell me what you didn't like about it." And nobody raised their hand. And he said, "I'm not the filmmaker. You don't have to worry about offending me. It's okay. Tell me, what did you have issues with? What didn't work?" And nobody raised their hand. And then finally a guy raised his hand. He says, "Why are you trying to make us say something bad about the movie? It's like a really good movie." And everybody, we were all shocked. And so I don't know that we previewed it again.
Why?
I wouldn't.
Right? Why? All right, why don't we, do you want to take some questions from the audience? Do we have any questions for the groundbreakers? Right here, do we have a microphone, or I can repeat? Oh, here comes the mic.
Coming.
Dun, dun, dun. Wow, don't hurt yourself. There you go.
Hi, this question is for Stephen. So obviously you're really used to working with kind of what you might call auteur directors, and it might seem a little off topic, but I was really hoping you could talk about what it was like to work on Robin Hood Men in Tights.
Was that a game changer?
For me, it was actually. I'd worked on some smaller films, primarily with one director that I came out here with, a guy named Peter Markle, who I made like maybe 4 or 5 films with. My origin was in commercials, industrials, documentaries, educational films, that kind of thing, and the occasional dramatic short. So I worked on a low-budget feature that was released, and then came out here and started working with this director, and made 4 or 5 films, a couple for cable, and a few features, and I got this opportunity to meet Mel Brooks, and it was a game changer for me in my career. To work with a legend like Mel on a real, honest-to-goodness Hollywood film with a Hollywood legend was my game changer in the industry. And we're still friends to this day. I just talked to him last week, and it is this, it's interesting because relationships in this business are everything. And, I know Robert had a very long relationship with Rob Reiner, and how many films did you do with him?
15.
15 films, okay. So, and it starts with something like Spinal Tap, and you go and you think you're doing these things, and it may or may not have an effect on your future, but it does. Because everything you do contributes to your ability and your ability to work with other people. And working with Mel was like the joy. And I heard stories that he's a screamer and he's terrible and you don't want to work with him and all that kind of stuff. Everybody's different. Everybody's relationship is unique. And our relationship kind of clicked. And it was, if I have just a moment, I'll tell a little anecdote. Because Mel had this idea that he never wanted to see an editor's cut. He never wanted to be influenced by somebody else's cut. He had it in his mind that comedy plays in 2 shots, and you never You never want to cut to close-ups and things. You only use close-ups and medium shots to bridge master shots together, because then you see the joke and the reaction in one shot, and it's organic. It's the way the actor delivered it. Well, this is coming from a comic. I said, listen, Mel, your actors are delivering some amazing performances that you really don't see the subtleties in these wide shots. So let me do the work and cut all this coverage. And if you don't like it or don't want to use it, it's a very simple thing to take it all out and use a shot to bridge two masters together, as opposed to the other way where you don't know what you have in coverage and we're cutting all the masters together. You have no idea what it would look like to be in medium shots or close-ups. So he never wanted to see daily. He never wanted to see a cut. But we had a problem with the scene where the DP said, "Gee, we shot this scene. It was a stick fight with Little John and Robin Hood on a bridge, and they shot over 2 days." And he said the fog is inconsistent. This is in film days where you couldn't change this stuff. So he said it's inconsistent. We may have to reshoot. And I said, let me put it together. And so I showed the scene after dailies, and the whole crew was there. And that was a game-changing moment for me, because I walked out. We screened at a little screening room at Big Time Pictures or something. And after dailies, I showed this scene, and everybody was relieved. They didn't have to reshoot A. And Mel walked down the hall with me and just said, I really got inside his head. And that changed everything for the entire rest of the film and our relationship.
Awesome. We have time for more questions?
Thanks.
We have time for one more question, if anyone has one. Here we go, right here.
This question is directed toward Paul, but kind of for everyone. You talked about the story about the preview and some self-doubt that you had. What strategies do you have, like while you're editing or after the edit, to help ground yourself? Because maybe you're in the weeds and you're looking at things maybe too closely. And then it's kind of directed toward Robert, because you kind of had the opposite experience where folks were not as satisfied with the preview. So how do you build that confidence? How do you get yourself in a mindset where you can look at things from a grounded standpoint?
Well, you can't really look at things from a grounded standpoint, because you lose your objectivity very early on. Do you guys agree? I mean, it's the most difficult thing to do is maintain one's objectivity when you're looking at this stuff, for months and months. And, I find for myself, it's, I cut the scene and it's got a rhythm that I know, and then I look at it again a couple of weeks later and the rhythm is implanted in my head. And so it's just the way our brains are wired. When the cut comes up on the rhythm that I'm expecting and it feels good, it's like I get an endorphin rush, because it's like listening to music, and so very hard to maintain one's objectivity. But I just jump in, I just, I'm very methodical about pulling selects before I start editing. And I go through and I just pull out all the little sections that I like, and then all the little line readings that I like. And then I use that as my raw material. When it's time to start editing the scene, I'm just like, move those around and try them different ways and leave black in between and get this really unwieldy sort of assembly. And then I duplicate that, and then I go through and start to pull it together. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Well, you asked me. I also don't know the answer to it. I don't think from the screenings we were talking, which were the final screenings of Spinal Tap, there was any sense of kind of trying to find grounding. I think all of us felt pretty good about the film, and we liked it. So we were sorry. I think it became a marketing thing at that point, how to educate people to like this. I actually had an anecdote from a friend of mine who saw it in the first or second weekend, and he was up in somewhere on location, and he said he was really enjoying it, but the 3 people or 4 people behind him were hating it and grumbling about it all the way through. And after about 15 minutes, he turned around and he said to them, "Don't you get it?" And he shouted at them and explained to them what the joke was, and then sat down, and then these guys were laughing for the rest of the movie, and they loved it. So I think that's kind of the answer to the Spinal Tap situation. As far as, I think for me, this comes to us all the time during the course of the editing, where you look at something, even when you show it to a director, you think you've done a good job, and they may not like that, and you start to question yourself, and you say, how can I be sure of what my taste is? Because in the end, I think that's all I feel that I'm being paid for, is my taste. And I've learned how to edit films, and there's not a standard procedure to it. I mean, in comedy, it's a very specific thing. There's not a standard way to stage a joke. Whenever you do cut a joke, afterwards you can look and you say, oh, I see the grammar of it now. You had to do this, you had to plan that, and you can see it. It makes sense because it's a perfect little thing then. But before, you can't take that and apply it to another thing. You always got to have an original look at it. And I think the biggest thing to is, in a way, I go between having an emotional reaction to it, because yes, there's those moments where you see the eyes widen slightly and you know you're cued into something. And other times when you have to think it through and say, well, it's like in previews, people will say they did, actually a better example is, I did the film Bull Durham, and the studio and the preview audiences didn't like the end of the movie. And we eventually, actually I don't think we got to preview, I think it was just with the studio, they didn't like the end of the movie. And they were complaining, they wanted us to do this and that and that. Eventually we said no. You look at what their problem is, you're the filmmakers, they don't know the solutions, they can tell you where they're uncomfortable, then you try to figure out what the math or the science or the emotional curve is. And we realized the problem was 5 scenes before the end of the movie. And we reshot that scene. And that had twisted somebody's character in a subtle way. And we reshot that scene, and then the film scored great after that. So it's all, you've got to think a little bit further into it.
It might also be worth noting that when we all started editing, we were editing on 35 millimeter film, or 16 in some cases. And, there are consequences to making an edit with 35 millimeter film, which, you put a splice in it, and that splice is going to jump when it goes through the projector, and then you're going to create more trims, and then if you go back and make a change, you're going to, it's time consuming to find the extension of that shot if you want to extend it, or if you want to shorten it, then you have like little, we used to call them short trims, and those had to be carefully kept in envelopes, but they always got lost, and they didn't have code numbers on them necessarily. You had a 1 in 16 chance of getting one with a code number on it. And so you would tend to take some time before you make that first splice, and you really kind of think it through, so that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it makes you kind of pre-visualize what you were going to do and kind of work it out in your mind and develop that skill set. But it's a curse because you go down a certain road and then you think, oh, well, now, what if I did it this way? You got to tear that all apart. You got to find those trims, and then you got to go down another road, and then you say, no, I like the first version better. And then you got to try to figure out how to put that back together again, and you expand that to the scale of an entire movie. And I mean, now you can have infinite number of versions of a scene, and that's a good thing, but it's also a terrible thing. Because you're trying to maintain objectivity. Try looking at 15 versions of a scene and then saying, okay, what's working and what's not. Your head is spinning. So there's no easy answer.
I was going to say, I think it falls under the realm of what I was talking about. When there are infinite possibilities, the ability to discern what is the best from each is the job of the editor and the director and the filmmakers basically. I think with the invention of digital editing and the ability to basically archive a historical record of your process as you go through the process of a scene evolving. I think that's an amazing asset that we have to work with, that when we had to scramble with trims and things that didn't exist. I love having the discipline of having come from that, because as Paul said, it's a premeditated process. And now I think on the opposite end of the scale is it's too easy to do and undo and do and undo without a game plan. So, I mean, but we have this incredible tool to work with that gives us a record that we can go back through. Maybe some of our gut instincts in the beginning were the right thing, and you can go mine those to see what could be valuable.
Well, that's great. I know we could keep going on, and we're keeping you from lunch, but we have a couple things to do first. I need to get my selfie, so smile. Thank you very much. Another thing I mainly want to thank, I'm so honored to be moderating this panel with the amazing guests here, so please give a round of applause to Jackie, Bob, Steve, and Paul.